Far across the African savannas, tens of thousands of years ago, the air shifts as day fades into night. The grasses sway gently, still warm from the sun, but the heat disappears quickly once darkness settles. For early humans, who live mostly without shelter, this change matters. Days are long and hot, but nights can turn cold enough to threaten comfort, even survival. The sky opens wide, filled with countless stars, and the land lies exposed to every whisper of the wind. In these vast open spaces, the question of warmth begins to shape human life. They already know how to huddle together for protection. Shared bodies hold heat. A fire, if it can be kept burning, creates a small circle of safety and light. Yet the fire does not follow when groups move. It fades when fuel runs out, or when storms sweep across the plains. To walk into darkness with only thin skin exposed to the air is to feel the world press close and sharp. This problem grows more pressing as climates slowly change. The Ice Age is not yet at its height, but shifts in rainfall and temperature are already shaping new challenges. The African environment is never uniform. Some years bring heavy rains, feeding rivers and filling lakes that shimmer in the savanna basins. Other years bring dryness, when grasses turn brittle and waterholes shrink. Early humans, always alert to the cycles of season and climate, adjust their movements to survive. Yet no matter the abundance or scarcity, nights remain unpredictable. Some regions, especially high plateaus or desert edges, chill rapidly after sunset. Children shiver, elders seek shelter among rock, and hunters returning late feel the sting of night air. To remain only within the warmest zones is impossible. Groups need to travel widely, following herds, searching for fruit, gathering tubers and seeds. Exposure to shifting temperatures is constant. Archaeologists studying this time often point to evidence of fire use as the main defense against cold. Ash layers found in ancient sites mark repeated burning, a sign that fire is carefully maintained. But fire has limits. It is fixed to one spot, demanding constant care. Sparks die easily when rain falls, or when wood grows scarce. To carry embers is possible, but difficult. Fire cannot be wrapped around the body or carried on long treks. Another solution, more portable and enduring, slowly emerges. It begins with the animals themselves. Hunting is already central to survival. Spears tipped with stone points, traps set along game paths, and coordinated drives all provide meat, marrow, and fat. When an antelope or buffalo is taken, its skin is one of the largest resources available. Thick, flexible, and broad, it is far more than waste. At first, hides may simply be left near the kill site, used casually as ground cover or shade. But with time, the potential becomes clear. A skin can be draped across shoulders, laid over sleeping bodies, or stretched against the wind. Even without preparation, it offers warmth far greater than bare skin alone. The earliest experiments are likely simple. A hide, stripped quickly, still carries traces of blood, fat, and tissue. It is heavy, stiff, and begins to rot within days. Yet in the moment, after a hunt, it is soft and pliable. Draped over the shoulders of a resting hunter, it shields against the evening chill. Parents may cover their children with it while sitting near the fire. Over time, these moments teach an important lesson. Animal skins hold heat, just as they once held it for the living creature. To borrow this heat is to step closer to safety. Archaeological evidence for such practices is elusive, Skins decay rapidly, leaving little trace in soil or cave, yet indirect clues remain. In sites dated to this period, stone flakes with distinctive wear marks suggest scraping. These tools are sharper on one edge, dulled on the other, as if repeatedly drawn across soft tissue. The likely target is hide, being stripped of fat and flesh to delay decay. Bones of animals show cut marks in patterns that align with skinning rather than butchery. Together, these traces hint at the growing role of hides in human life, even before advanced methods of preservation appear. The need for protection is not limited to cold. Sun and thorn, dust and insect all press against exposed skin. A covering, even crude, helps shield the body. Nomadic groups that travel through thorn bush or across dry plains learn the value of wrapping hides around legs and arms. Each experiment deepens knowledge. Slowly, skills form: how to cut, how to tie, how to carry. Clothing does not appear all at once as a finished invention. It grows step by step, shaped by necessity and observation. The landscape itself reinforces the lesson. As glaciers begin to expand far to the north, climates in Africa shift in subtle but important ways. Grasslands spread, drawing herds outward. Forests retreat, leaving open terrain exposed to wind. Nights in these spaces feel longer and colder. Even in equatorial zones, higher elevations bring chill. For people moving through these regions, hides are more than convenience. They become a line between endurance and weakness. A body wrapped in skin conserves energy, sleeps more deeply, wakes more ready to hunt or travel. Over generations, such small advantages accumulate. Survival becomes linked to the knowledge of how to use the remains of animals not only for food, but also for covering. Yet mysteries remain. Scientists still debate when clothing first became common. Some genetic studies of lice suggest that clothing-specific parasites emerged perhaps 170,000 years ago, much earlier than surviving tools indicate. If correct, this means that humans may have been covering their bodies far longer than the archaeological record shows. The absence of preserved hides does not mean absence of use. Instead, it reveals the fragility of organic material, easily lost to time. In this gap, only indirect signs can guide us. The scraping stones, the wear on bones, the clues of ancient lice, all speak quietly of an innovation without clear beginning. On a planetary scale, the pressure is steady. The Earth tilts and wobbles through its cycles, shifting monsoons and reshaping rainfall. Glacial ice locks away water, lowering seas. Coastlines stretch outward, exposing wide shelves of land. Winds grow stronger across these plains, bringing dust storms and colder nights. In this changing world, adaptation is constant. Fire alone cannot meet every need. Stone alone cannot feed every hunger. To endure, humans learn to combine elements: stone to hunt, fire to cook, hides to protect. Each discovery adds to the next, weaving a web of survival that stretches far beyond any single tool. Step by step, a new pattern forms. To take life from an animal is also to borrow its warmth. To scrape and prepare a hide is to extend the body's boundary into the world. What begins as a casual drape of skin across tired shoulders grows, across countless nights, into a habit. Habits turn into traditions. Traditions pass into memory, and memory becomes a skill shared by the group, carried into the next generation. On these cold nights, under vast skies, the foundation of clothing takes shape. The flames flicker against the darkness, their glow reaching outward into the open night. For early humans, fire is both wonder and tool. It warms chilled skin, dries damp wood, and keeps prowling animals at a distance. Sparks leap upward, scattering into the sky like stars around the hearth. Shadows move gently, and voices murmur in low tones. Fire is already at the center of life, a gathering place, a defense, a companion to long evenings. Yet as powerful as it is, fire remains tied to place. The moment a group rises to travel, the warmth stays behind. The night wind returns, sharp and restless. Fire is gift, but also burden. Archaeological traces suggest that controlled fire is part of human life for hundreds of thousands of years. Hearths in caves, rings of stone, and layers of ash mark repeated burning. These sites show not just accidental flames but maintained fires, fed with care. People know how to gather dry wood, how to nurse embers, how to shield sparks against gusts of wind. The presence of fire changes diet, making roots easier to chew, meat safer to eat. It alters rhythm, extending day into night. But one thing it cannot do is move with the people themselves. Flames are fragile. A sudden storm, a burst of rain, or a shift in camp can snuff them out. To carry fire is possible. Bundles of dry grass can be lit and sheltered in horns or shells. Embers can be tucked in bark or bone, carried gently across short distances. Yet even then, the flame needs constant feeding. It smokes, weakens, or dies. The task of tending it becomes a responsibility, given to one or two members of the group. Still, the problem remains. Fire is bound to the hearth. When the group rests, it protects. When the group moves, its reach ends. In these moments, the human body is once again bare to the elements. Clothing begins to answer where fire cannot. A skin draped over the body is a fire that travels. It holds heat without wood, without sparks. Unlike flame, it does not consume fuel or demand constant watch. Step by step, the two technologies, fire and hide, complement each other. Fire softens sinew, making it easier to tie. Fire smokes hides, preserving them against decay. Hides, in turn, let people wander farther from camp, carrying warmth across landscape and season. Together, they shape survival in ways no single invention could achieve alone. The evidence of this partnership appears in small traces. Stones heated in ancient hearths bear discoloration from repeated use. Nearby, flakes of stone show polish from scraping. These twin artifacts suggest activities linked together. Skins processed beside fires, softened by smoke and warmed to make them pliable. Residues of fat on stone tools also point toward this practice. Fat, when rubbed into hide, slows the growth of bacteria and keeps fibers flexible. The fire hardens some tools, making scrapers sharper and more durable. Step by step, fire serves not only as heat, but as part of the technology of clothing itself. The burden of fire is also cultural. To maintain flame is to gather regularly, to create routines of care. Anthropologists note that the hearth likely becomes a social center, the place where stories and knowledge are shared. Here, the skills of scraping, tying, and stretching skins would also be taught. One person demonstrates how smoke changes the texture of hide. Another shows how sinew tightens when dried near flame. In the glow of light, experiments become instruction. Knowledge travels across generations, carried not in words alone, but in repeated gestures. Fire's circle becomes a classroom. Yet mysteries remain. Scholars debate when the use of fire truly became regular. Some argue that evidence stretches back nearly 1,000,000 years, pointing to ancient ash and heated stones in East Africa. Others suggest that consistent, widespread use is far more recent, perhaps within the last 300,000 years. The timeline is unclear, shaped by the difficulty of preserving fire traces across deep time. What is certain is that by the time clothing from hides begins to matter, fire is already central. Whether in caves, rock shelters, or open plains, its presence is constant. Its absence is feared. Planetary cycles amplify the need for both fire and clothing. The Earth moves through glacial rhythms, cooling at times, warming at others. When ice advances far to the north, winds change. Dry air sweeps across continents, lowering rainfall. Grasslands expand, deserts spread. Nights grow colder. Fire becomes more essential, yet also harder to sustain when wood is scarce. Groups migrating through semi-arid plains cannot always find enough fuel. In such places, hides offer a substitute, conserving body heat where fire cannot reach. The two technologies, together, extend human range into environments once unlivable. The relationship is not simple. Fire can also harm hides. Sparks may burn holes. Heat may stiffen untreated skins. This forces care. People learn to hang hides at the edge of smoke, not in the heart of flame. They discover that too much heat makes leather brittle, while gentle smoke preserves it. These lessons accumulate, adding subtlety to daily practice. Survival depends not just on having tools, but on knowing how to balance them. Fire must be controlled. Hides must be tended. Together, they form a delicate partnership between element and artifact. A lesser-known detail comes from microscopic studies of stone tools. Under magnification, tiny patterns of wear reveal not just cutting of meat, but scraping of softer materials. Some patterns match the texture of hide. When compared with experimental archaeology, modern attempts to replicate ancient techniques, the results align. Tools used to scrape hides near fire show distinct wear different from those used only on wood or bone. These fine traces confirm that clothing was not only imagined, but actively pursued. Even if no skins survive, the memory of their preparation remains etched in stone. At a larger scale, this partnership reshapes human possibility. Fire and hides together allow rest in places once too harsh. They enable travel at higher altitudes, across wider plains, and through seasons of scarcity. With warmth, portable and enduring, humans are less bound to the cycles of daylight or the shelter of caves. The earth, vast and shifting, opens new paths. The winds that sweep across deserts, the rains that vanish from basins, the cold that settles after sunset, all can be met with two allies, flame and skin. One glows, the other wraps. One stays in place, the other travels. Together, they prepare humanity for journeys yet to come. In the quiet of night, the fire still crackles. Shadows lengthen, bodies draw close. Hides drape across shoulders. Embers glow red, fading slowly as stars drift overhead. Tomorrow, the group may move on. The fire will be left behind, reduced to ash. But the skins, softened by smoke, tied with sinew, will travel further. The burden of fire is constant, but so too is its gift. And where its reach ends, the new protection of hides begins. Across the open grasslands, herds move in vast numbers, antelope gather in restless waves, zebras graze in striped patterns, and great buffalo drift toward waterholes. For early humans, these animals are more than moving shapes on the horizon. They are food, marrow, fat, and sinew. They are risk and reward. The hunt is dangerous, requiring patience, coordination, and tools chipped from stone. Yet with every successful kill, a wide resource is revealed, the skin of the animal itself, thick and resilient, waiting to be noticed as more than refuse. The moment after a hunt is filled with urgency. Meat must be divided, marrow extracted, fat carefully stored. But as blades of stone glide along limbs and ribs, the skin peels away almost in a single sheet, heavy, damp, and warm. It carries the imprint of the animal's body. At first, this may seem like nothing more than byproduct, but to those who live under open skies, the potential soon becomes visible. A hide can be laid on the ground, creating a barrier between flesh and cold soil. It can be stretched above as shade, or folded around shoulders as night air settles. Even before deliberate preparation, hides already extend human endurance. Archaeological evidence suggests that hide use emerges naturally alongside hunting. Cut marks found on animal bones often cluster around joints and along lines where skin would be removed. These patterns differ from simple butchery. They reveal skill in flaying, an effort to separate hide cleanly rather than discard it with the meat. Scraper tools found nearby show distinctive edge wear. Under magnification, the patterns align with modern experiments in hide working. Each groove and polish tells a quiet story. Skins were not ignored. They were pulled, stretched, and shaped. Hunters know the worth of their prey beyond flesh alone. Sinew can be dried and twisted into cord. Bones can be sharpened into points. Horns can serve as containers. The hide, broad and strong, becomes one of the most versatile materials of all. A fresh skin holds warmth, as if the animal's body still breathes within it. For families gathered at a fire, this warmth can cradle children against night chill. For hunters resting between drives, it can serve as a cover or mat. Gradually, people begin to recognize the hide as something more than a temporary shield. It is a resource that, if treated with care, can last far beyond the days of the hunt. The use of hides also intersects with survival strategies in specific landscapes. In highland zones, where temperatures drop sharply after sunset, skins are precious. In wetter regions, they offer shelter against damp ground. Along river valleys, they can be stretched as barriers against insects. Even in the driest deserts, hides shield the body from the punishing sun. Every terrain teaches a new lesson in how animal skin can extend life. Yet, there is also fragility. Untreated hides rot quickly, stiffen, and grow foul. Left in the open, they invite insects and mold. This forces experimentation. People learn that scraping fat and flesh delays decay. They discover that stretching hides in the sun hardens them, while smoke from fire slows rot. Fat rubbed into the surface softens fibers, making skins flexible. Each small discovery pushes the hide from temporary shelter to deliberate tool. One lesser-known clue comes from sites where hides themselves have not survived, but impressions have. In some caves, mineral crusts preserve faint outlines of organic material. These ghostly traces suggest mats or coverings once laid upon the floor. Elsewhere, beads of ochre appear alongside animal bones, hinting at decoration on skins. Such indirect evidence reminds us that much of the story of hides is hidden, erased by time. What we know is pieced together from fragments, each one fragile yet telling. The mystery lies in timing. When did humans begin to use skins as clothing rather than simply as covers or mats? No direct evidence answers this with certainty. Some argue that hide use is ancient, perhaps as old as organized hunting itself, stretching back hundreds of thousands of years. Others suggest that true clothing, fitted and sewn, comes far later, tens of thousands of years ago. Between these poles lies a silence in the record. Skins rot, fibers vanish. What remains are the stone tools, the bones, and the questions they raise. Planetary change, again, sets the stage. As Earth moves through glacial cycles, climates in Africa shift toward dryness. Grasslands widen, winds sharpen, rainfall grows uncertain. Hunting becomes even more central as plant resources thin. With every kill, hides become more abundant, and with colder nights more common. The incentive to use them grows. The planet's shifting rhythms push humans not only to hunt, but also to transform the remains into protection. Without these steps, expansion into new zones, arid plains, high plateaus, eventually colder latitudes, would be impossible. To imagine the scale of this transformation, one can think of distance. A group moving from equatorial plains into highland valleys travels the equivalent of hundreds of kilometers. The difference in climate along this path is as stark as moving today from a tropical city to a temperate mountain town. Without hides, the body is unguarded against such shifts. With hides, warmth travels with the people. In this way, each sheet of skin extends not only survival, but the reach of migration itself. The hunt is therefore not only about food, but also about material. Every animal taken expands the toolkit of survival. A buffalo provides weeks of meat, but its hide may cover an entire shelter. A smaller antelope offers one evening's feast, but its skin can wrap a child against cold. Over time, preferences emerge. Some hides are too thin, others too stiff. Hunters notice that the skin of certain animals resists tearing, while others soften easily. These observations, repeated across generations, become knowledge as valuable as any skill with stone or fire. Still, the relationship is never without cost. To take a hide is to carry heavy weight. To scrape and preserve it requires labor. In lean seasons, when food itself is scarce, such work may seem excessive. Yet those who invest in hides gain advantage. They can sleep more warmly, travel more securely, and endure longer journeys. These small benefits accumulate across generations, shaping who survives and who thrives. By the time groups begin to move beyond Africa into new continents, the practice of hide use is already ingrained. Though the tools change, though climates vary, the principle holds: the hunted animal is not only food, but also fabric. Its skin is a second boundary for the human body, a portable shelter carried on the back. From the moment of the kill, to the scraping by the fire, to the wrapping of children at night, hides become part of daily rhythm. The hunters may not know they are laying the foundation for one of humanity's greatest technologies. They only know that the nights grow cold, and that the skin of animals can guard against it. Yet in these small practical acts, the future is being stitched. Clothing begins here, in the moment when the hunter sees more than meat and keeps the hide for what it can become. When a fresh hide is pulled from the body of an animal, it is heavy with moisture, lined with fat, and streaked with flesh. Left as it is, it stiffens quickly under the sun, curls at the edges, and begins to rot. To transform this raw skin into something usable, hands must work, and stone must scrape. In this act of scraping, one of the earliest crafts takes shape. The first tools are simple flakes of stone, broken from larger cores with sharp edges still jagged from the strike. These flakes, though crude, bite into fat and tissue. Hunters and gatherers sit by the fire or in the shade, dragging edge against skin. Fat peels away. Strands of flesh lift free. Over hours, the surface of the hide grows cleaner. What was once heavy and wet begins to dry, still stiff but less prone to decay. The rhythm of scraping becomes part of daily life after hunts. Archaeologists trace this practice through wear on stone tools. Microscopic striations run parallel along edges, distinct from those left by cutting meat or carving wood. These patterns reveal repeated contact with soft, fibrous surfaces, most likely hides. Experimental archaeology, where researchers scrape fresh skins with replica tools, confirms the match. Each groove is a fingerprint of ancient labor. The result is evidence that early humans, tens of thousands of years ago, already invested time in working hides. Scraping alone, however, is not enough. A hide stripped of fat can still harden like wood. To make it pliable, people discover other methods. Stretching the skin over wooden frames or across poles keeps it flat as it dries. Rubbing in fat softens fibers, while smoke from a low fire adds chemicals that resist bacteria. Over generations, these techniques evolve slowly, not as inventions of a single moment, but as accumulated wisdom. A hide worked this way bends, folds, and drapes. It no longer cracks at the first movement, but shapes itself around the body. One lesser-known detail comes from discoveries of bone tools shaped like awls. At sites such as Blombos Cave in South Africa, fragments of bone show polish consistent with piercing soft material. These tools, dating back more than 70,000 years, may have been used not only for sewing, but also for preparing skins, punching holes to help scrape or stretching hides across stakes. Their presence suggests that hide working was a recognized craft, demanding tools beyond stone alone. The process also intersects with fire. Skins hung above smoldering logs absorb smoke. Aldehydes and phenols in the smoke bind with collagen in the hide, slowing decay and deterring insects. This early form of tanning leaves skins darker, more flexible, and far more durable. Archaeologists find indirect hints of this practice in cave deposits where smoke stains extend upward beyond hearths, as if hides had been suspended overhead. No skins survive, but the soot still whispers of their presence. Mysteries remain about how widely such techniques spread. Some scholars argue that regular hide processing was common only in colder regions, where survival demanded constant covering. Others propose that it was already widespread in Africa, long before humans left for Eurasia. The record is silent. Skins do not last. What endures are the stone tools, the bone awls, the traces of ochre and smoke. From these fragments, a picture emerges. Scraping and softening are already central long before fitted garments appear. At a planetary scale, the implications are vast. The Earth's climate oscillates, with glacial periods drawing more water into ice sheets, lowering seas and cooling air. In Africa, This means wider savannas, longer dry seasons, and sharper contrasts between day and night. The ability to prepare hides grants resilience. Groups can rest in highland valleys or trek across open plains without being undone by chill. A treated skin is more than comfort. It is survival. The portable shelter it provides allows humans to push further, explore longer, and adapt more fully to environments in flux. The scale of the craft also matters. A large animal such as an aurochs provides enough hide to cover a family, while smaller gazelle skins can be tied together. Experiments show that a well-scraped and smoked hide retains heat far better than untreated skin, comparable, in effect, to a thick, modern blanket. To possess such a resource means that groups can endure nights where the temperature drops by 10 or 15 degrees. Across generations, these small margins mean the difference between thriving and failing. Scraping also teaches precision. The hide must not be cut through, or holes weaken it. Tools must be sharp, but not too sharp. The angle of scraping changes texture. Steeper angles remove flesh quickly. Shallow angles polish. Through repetition, hands learn instinctively how to balance force. In this quiet labor, craft knowledge forms, knowledge that cannot be seen in stone but lives in memory and practice. The persistence of this knowledge across millennia is what allows humans eventually to stitch garments, create tents, and build new forms of shelter. It begins here, with scraping. Another subtle clue comes from residues on ancient scrapers. Chemical analysis sometimes reveals traces of fat or collagen. These residues, though faint, align with the story told by wear marks. They confirm that the tools touched animal skins, not just meat. Each flake of stone, discarded and buried, thus becomes a fragment of evidence for an invisible craft. The process of hide working also ties humans more deeply to animals. To eat from the body of an antelope is one act, to wear its skin is another, carrying a part of it into daily life. Over time, such practices may have influenced symbolic thought. Decorated hides, painted with ochre or adorned with beads, suggest that skins were not only practical, but also meaningful. Though Section 10 will explore this more fully, the roots may lie here. When scraping a hide first turned a carcass into a second skin for the human body. At night, after long scraping, hides may be stretched near the fire, their surfaces glistening in the glow. Children might sleep beneath them, hunters rest upon them, and elders teach how to cut or fold. The sound of scraping, rhythmic and steady, fills the air. In these moments, the boundary between necessity and craft blurs. Clothing is still crude, still distant from the tailored garments of later millennia. Yet the principle is clear. Skins can be transformed. They can be softened, shaped, preserved. Step by step, this knowledge moves with migrations. When groups leave one valley for another, they carry not only stone tools but also hides, softened by hand. When they cross into new climates, the skill of scraping ensures that raw skins can be turned into coverings within days. As this portable craft is as important as fire-making or hunting itself, it spreads knowledge as surely as people spread across continents. And so the scrape of stone on skin, repeated countless times across countless evenings, becomes one of the quiet engines of human survival. No monument marks it, no artifact survives in full. Yet in the rhythm of this act lies the seed of clothing, of warmth carried on the move, of technology born not from invention at once but from patient, enduring work. A raw hide, freshly taken from the body of an animal, is alive with vulnerability. It holds warmth, yet it also carries decay. Without treatment, it stiffens, shrinks, and soon begins to rot. For early humans, this reality presses close. To preserve a skin for more than a few days, new methods must be discovered. Slowly, through trial, error, and the repetition of daily tasks, people learn the secrets of preservation. Smoke, fat, and tanning become part of their craft. The first insight may have come by accident. When hides were hung near the fire to dry, smoke curled around them. Later, when they were taken down, they smelled sharp, different. More importantly, they lasted longer. Smoke contains chemicals, aldehydes, phenols, and acids that bind with collagen fibers in skin. These chemicals slow bacteria, deter insects, and prevent the rapid stiffening that ruins raw hides. Without knowing the science, early humans discovered the effect. To hang a hide above the fire was to gift it longer life. Archaeologists find indirect hints of this practice in ancient hearths. Smoke stains creep upward into cave ceilings. Ash layers mingle with animal bones and scraping tools. Some deposits reveal repeated burning in the same place for centuries. Such long use suggests that activities beyond cooking took place around the fire. Hides, hung above embers, may have absorbed not only warmth, but also protection against decay. Though no skins survive, the patterns of soot and ash whisper of their presence. Fat provided another key. After scraping away flesh, people began rubbing animal fat into the skin. This simple act, perhaps first intended as cleaning, softened fibers and made hides more flexible. Fat sealed microscopic gap, reducing water loss and slowing stiffening. In experimental archaeology today, hides treated with fat remain pliable for weeks, longer than untreated skins. Early humans may have noticed that hides left near butchering sites where fat-smeared surfaces resisted cracking more than others. From observation grew practice, and from practice grew tradition. Together, smoke and fat created a primitive form of tanning. This was not yet the chemical tanning of later societies with bark and minerals. Instead, it was a blending of heat, grease, and smoke that turned fragile skins into workable, durable coverings. The process was slow, requiring hours of scraping, stretching, rubbing, and hanging. But the reward was immense: hides that could fold, wrap, and bend without breaking. For people living under open skies, this meant warmth carried across seasons, journeys, and landscapes. One lesser-known piece of evidence comes from residues of ochre found on worked bone tools. At first glance, ochre seems decorative, linked to body painting or symbolic art. Yet some researchers suggest that ochre powders may also have been used in hide treatment. Iron oxides in ochre have antibacterial properties, and when mixed with fat, they may have created a paste that slowed decay. If true, then early humans not only preserved hides with smoke and fat, but also experimented with minerals, blending earth and animal in the service of survival. Mystery surrounds the origins of these practices. Did one group discover smoke curing while another relied more heavily on fat? Were these methods invented independently in different regions, or carried from place to place as people migrated? The record offers no certainty. Skins and fats vanish, leaving only the durable stones and bones. Yet the scattered clues, from soot stains to residues, point to a widespread knowledge. Preservation of hides was not rare, but fundamental, repeated across time and landscape. Planetary forces pressed the need further. As glacial cycles cooled the northern hemisphere, Winds shifted across Africa. Nights grew colder on open plains. Rainfall grew more erratic, and resources tightened. Preserved hides provided not just warmth, but also continuity. A smoked skin could last into the dry season, ready to shield against dust storms. A fat-rubbed hide could survive weeks of travel, carried on long treks across empty savannas. Each preserved skin extended human resilience against the shifting climate of the Pleistocene world. The scale of preservation can be imagined in numbers. A large hide from an aurochs or buffalo could weigh tens of kilograms and cover several square meters. When treated, it might serve as a ground sheet, a blanket, or a makeshift shelter. Several hides, stitched or tied together, could form a tent against wind and rain. Even smaller skins, gazelle, antelope, or hare, had value. Layered, they created insulation. Strips could be cut for ties and cords. Nothing was wasted, and every preserved hide expanded human capacity to endure. Scraping tools reveal the patience behind this work. To clean a hide properly may have taken many hours, perhaps spread over days. Fat was rubbed by hand, pressed into fibers. Smoke required constant tending of the fire, keeping embers alive without flames that might scorch the hide. These were not quick tasks, but labors of attention. In the rhythm of this work, skill was honed, and memory passed from elders to children. Around the hearth, knowledge became tradition. A lesser-known clue comes from microscopic studies of cave sediments. In some sites, crystals of fatty acids have been detected, trapped in soil layers thousands of years old. These residues suggest repeated handling of fat, not just for food, but for other purposes. While direct links to hide treatment are hard to prove, the presence of fat residues near scraping tools strengthens the possibility. Even invisible traces in soil confirm that humans were already experimenting with substances to preserve and soften skins. The mystery remains: how early did these techniques reach complexity? Some scholars argue that full tanning using bark, tannins, or minerals emerged only with later hunter-gatherers in Eurasia. Others believe that African groups experimented with local plants far earlier, leaving no trace. The truth may never be known. What is certain is that by combining smoke, fat, and scraping, early humans created skins that lasted far longer than raw hides. This was a turning point. On a planetary scale, this turning point meant expansion. Preserved hides enabled movement into colder latitudes, across open steppes, and eventually into glacial Eurasia. Without preservation, clothing would have been temporary, falling apart after days. With it, garments could survive seasons. Human presence expanded across climates that no bare body could endure. In this way, smoke and fat shaped migration itself. At night, the scene repeats endlessly. A fire glows in the dark, smoke rising into the stars. Beside it, a hide stretches on poles, edges curling in the heat. Hands smear fat along its surface, pressing deep into fibers. Children watch, learning the motion. Elders test the softness, tugging gently. Slowly, the hide transforms. It is no longer raw animal skin, but a human-made material, a tool of warmth and survival. Step by step, these acts lay the foundation for later complexity. The smoke-darkened hides of ancient hunters are ancestors to leather, textiles, and clothing traditions that stretch across millennia. What began as necessity becomes craft. What began as accident becomes knowledge, and in the slow rhythm of scraping, rubbing, and smoking, the seeds of humanity's long relationship with clothing take root. The moment arrives when hides move beyond ground cover or simple blankets. After scraping, smoking, and rubbing with fat, skins become pliable. They fold, bend, and stretch. Now they can be shaped more deliberately. The most direct use is also the simplest, to wrap the body. Early humans learned that a hide draped across the shoulders or tied around the waist creates protection that moves with them. This step, though modest, marks the birth of clothing. Imagine a group preparing to leave camp at dusk. Fires are dying, smoke rising into the sky. Hunters tie skins around their torsos, securing them with strips of sinew. Children are wrapped in smaller hides, carried against their mothers' bodies, each covering shields against the sharp night air. The act is not sewing, not tailoring, but it is practical. A hide becomes a mobile hearth, holding warmth without flame. Step by step, humans begin to carry shelter on their own bodies. Archaeological evidence for this stage is indirect. Skins rarely survive, but tools give clues. Awls, sharp-pointed bones, appear in sites tens of thousands of years old. These may have been used to pierce holes in hides, allowing thongs of sinew or plant fiber to pass through. By tying skins together, people could create larger coverings or secure them tightly around limbs. Even before true sewing emerges, simple fastening allows hides to function as garments. Stone scrapers found with polish along edges confirm preparation of hides thin enough to drape across shoulders without tearing. The principle is universal. Warmth travels with the person. In deserts, hides shield against sun and wind. In highlands, they guard against night frost. On open plains, they soften the sting of dust storms. Each use reinforces the value of portability. Fire warms only the hearth, but hides warm the journey. This dual technology, fixed flame and mobile skin, expands the horizon of survival. One lesser-known clue comes from cave floor impressions. At some sites, outlines of hides pressed into sediment suggest that skins were not only laid beneath sleepers but also draped over them. The positioning implies wrapping rather than simple mats. Although faint, these traces hint that hides were already part of bodily covering long before tailored garments appeared. Mystery surrounds the question of when wrapping became daily practice. Was it seasonal, used only in cold months, or constant? Did some groups rely heavily on hides, while others managed with fire alone? The record is silent. Climate models suggest that variability was high. In some regions, nights could drop by 15 degrees from daytime highs. In others, rains soaked bodies until chills set in. Wrapping the body in skins may have begun as response to specific stresses, later becoming habit. The absence of preserved hides leaves the timeline uncertain. Planetary forces again shape the pattern. As glaciers expand in the north, African climates swing between wet and dry, grasslands broaden, herds shift, and humans follow. Along these journeys, the practice of wrapping the body becomes essential. A group traveling hundreds of kilometers cannot rely on fire alone. They need warmth on the move. Wrapped hides make possible the long treks between waterholes, the hunts that stretch deep into night, and the migrations across exposed valleys. Clothing becomes as much a tool of mobility as spears or baskets. The simplicity of wrapping also encourages variation. Some hides are tied with sinew across the chest, creating a crude cloak. Others are folded around the waist like skirts, freeing arms and shoulders for carrying loads. Children may be swaddled in skins and carried against the body. their warmth mingling with that of the parent. Over time, these variations become tradition. Certain groups favor cloaks, others skirts, still others leg wrappings for travel through thorny brush. Each choice reflects environment and necessity. On a smaller scale, wrapping teaches the first lessons of fit. A hide too stiff rubs against skin. One too loose catches in branches. People learn to choose, to cut, to adjust. A hide thinned by scraping folds more easily, while one smoked for longer resists insects. Knowledge of materials deepens. In this quiet experimentation, the seed of tailoring is planted. The path from simple drape to sewn garment begins here. Another subtle clue lies in human lice. Genetic studies suggest that clothing-specific lice diverged from head lice around 170,000 years ago. This implies that humans were covering their bodies regularly enough for lice to adapt. Such evidence, invisible to the eye, reveals that wrapping hides was not occasional, but sustained, shaping even the parasites that lived alongside people. It is one of the strongest signs that clothing became part of daily life deep in prehistory. The scale of difference such wrapping made can be measured in endurance. A hunter wrapped in hide can walk further at night, conserving heat. A child swaddled in skin can survive nights that would otherwise prove fatal. A group carrying preserved hides can cross landscapes others cannot. Across generations, these small margins accumulate into survival advantage. The practice of wrapping hides becomes one of the quiet forces enabling human expansion. Yet there is fragility. Untreated or poorly tied skins slip, tear, or stiffen. Rain soaks hides, making them heavy. Insects burrow into untreated fibers. To maintain them requires labor, scraping, re-smoking, re-rubbing with fat. This constant work ties people more deeply to their materials. Clothing is not permanent but living, in need of care. In tending it, humans deepen their relationship with the animals whose skins they wear.
Night after night, the image repeats. A circle of fire glows, embers flicker red. Around it, figures rest, each draped in hides. Smoke curls upward, carrying the scent of fat and skin. The warmth is not perfect, but it is enough. Tomorrow they will rise and travel again, the hides wrapped around them as silent companions. In these scenes, the idea of clothing shifts from occasional tool to daily necessity.
On a planetary scale, this shift is profound. The Earth at this time is already preparing for deeper glaciations. Winds sweep dust across continents. Seas recede as ice locks away water, and ecosystems shift. Humans who wrap their bodies extend their reach into climates harsher than their bare skin could allow. Clothing is no longer only response to discomfort, but a technology of expansion. The world opens wider, not because the climate softens, but because humans adapt. Thus, the practice of wrapping, simple yet transformative, stands as one of humanity's earliest technologies. No monuments mark it, no artifacts survive whole. Yet in the quiet act of tying skins across shoulders or around waists, a revolution begins. The body becomes portable shelter. The line between human and environment altered forever. Clothing, born of necessity, becomes the silent partner of migration, endurance, and future innovation. The world shifts slowly, but its effects are immense. Across tens of thousands of years, glaciers expand in the far north. Sheets of ice grow thicker, stretching over Europe and parts of Asia. As the ice advances, the planet changes. Oceans sink as water is locked in frozen walls. Winds strengthen, sweeping dust across continents. In Africa, though far from the glaciers, the signs are felt. Nights grow colder, dry seasons lengthen, and the savannas stretch wider. It is in this changing climate that clothing moves from convenience toward necessity. For early humans on open plains, the difference is sharp. Daylight can still blaze with heat, yet as the sun falls, cold descends with sudden force. The air that flows from highland plateaus is crisp, cutting into skin. Children shiver. Elders draw close to fires. Groups press together for warmth. The hides that once served as optional coverings now become essential companions. Draped over shoulders, tied across chests, wrapped around limbs. They guard against winds that rise at dusk. Archaeological evidence supports this shift. Around 70,000 years ago, populations expand into regions with harsher climates. Caves in southern Africa, such as Sibadu and Border Cave, reveal bone tools shaped into awls and scrapers. Their wear marks suggest repeated hide processing. These sites also preserve traces of bedding made from plants, layered with ash, hinting at complex strategies for warmth. In such settings, hides are not only for sleeping, but also for clothing. The evidence points to a culture adjusting to climate, investing in material survival. The Ice Age winds do more than chill. They also reshape migration. Herds move in new patterns, following shifting grasses and shrinking water sources. Humans follow, sometimes into cooler valleys and higher elevations. To survive in these environments, they cannot rely solely on fire. Fuel is scarce in grasslands, and wind disperses heat quickly. Wrapped hides, preserved by smoke and softened by fat, provide a shield that moves with the body. Without them, long treks under cold skies would sap strength and risk life. With them, new horizons open. One lesser-known detail emerges from studies of hair lice. Genetic analyses show that clothing-specific lice diverged from head lice roughly 170,000 years ago. This suggests that humans were already wearing body coverings regularly enough for lice to adapt. The timing aligns with climatic stress and expanding ranges. Though no skin from this era survives, the biology of tiny parasites tells a silent story. Clothing became routine long before direct evidence appears in the archaeological record. Mystery lingers around the exact forms these garments took. Were they cloaks fastened with sinew, skirts tied at the waist, or full-body wrappings layered against frost? The absence of preserved hides leaves the answer uncertain. Some researchers believe garments were simple, draped loosely, while others propose more fitted designs secured with early stitching. The tools suggest possibility, but the forms remain hidden. What is clear is that clothing was not occasional. It had become woven into daily life, as central as fire and stone. At the planetary scale, the stakes were high. Earth's orbit shifted subtly, altering the balance of sunlight and triggering cycles of glaciation. Vast deserts spread in northern Africa, transforming once green regions into arid expanses. Lakes dried, rivers retreated, and people clustered near remaining water sources. To cross these exposed zones required resilience. A group wrapped in hides could march longer under cold winds, rest with more comfort at night, and preserve strength for foraging and hunting. Clothing thus became a technology of endurance, shaping where humans could go and how far they could push into uncertain landscapes. The scale of these migrations was immense. A group moving from Central Africa into the Levant for example, would traverse thousands of kilometers. Along this journey, they encountered varied climates, scorching deserts by day, freezing plateaus by night. Without hides, such a trek would be impossible. With them, it became survivable. In this way, the Ice Age winds, though harsh, acted as a forge, shaping human reliance on clothing and pushing the craft of hide preparation forward. Within camps, the work of hide preparation intensified, scraping tools multiplied, smoke-darkened caves thickened with residue, and bone awls became more common. Each hide demanded hours of labor. Children watched elders pierce and tie, learning motions by repetition. The knowledge spread not through words alone, but through the rhythm of practice. In this transmission of skill lay resilience across generations. The ability to prepare hides was no longer optional knowledge. It was survival itself. Another subtle clue lies in ochre, widely used across Ice Age Africa. Pieces of ochre shaped by grinding appear in sites alongside animal remains. While often linked to symbolic expression, some scholars argue that ochre powder mixed with fat may have been applied to hides. If true, ochre served both decorative and preservative purposes. The red stain may have carried meaning, but it also slowed decay. Such blending of symbolism and practicality foreshadows later cultural uses of clothing, when garments became markers of identity as well as tools of survival. The Ice Age winds also tested the limits of fire. In exposed grasslands, flames died quickly, unable to resist gusts. Fuel was scattered, forcing long searches for wood. In these conditions, hides took on even greater importance. Wrapped garments became portable fire, warmth that did not flicker or fade. At night, by dim embers, people slept beneath layered skins, their breath rising in mist. By day, they walked across plains with hides drawn tight, deflecting wind and dust. Clothing had become an indispensable companion of every journey. Planetary changes did not relent. As ice sheets thickened further north, dust from expanding deserts swept thousands of kilometers, settling in layers across the Earth. These deposits, visible in geological cores today, testify to the intensity of the winds. Early humans lived in that environment directly. Their skins felt the dust, their lungs inhaled it, and their hides bore the brunt. Each garment, darkened by smoke and rubbed with fat, stood between the body and the planet's vast, shifting breath. The transformation was not dramatic in a single moment. It was gradual, the slow accumulation of necessity. A hide wrapped against chill one night became a daily habit. A habit became tradition. A tradition became the foundation of migration. The Ice Age winds, though invisible in the archaeological record, are written into the fabric of humanity's survival. They turned hides from optional blankets into essential clothing, from casual covering into crafted technology. In the glow of firelight, beneath winds that sweep endlessly across plains, humans wrapped themselves in the skins of animals. They stepped into the future, clothed not only in necessity but also in adaptation. The winds of the Ice Age pressed against them, and in resisting, they shaped the path forward. Clothing, born of smoke and fat, now bound firmly to the body, would carry them across continents, through deserts, and eventually into lands where ice itself ruled the horizon. Stone flakes and scrapers tell part of the story, but bone tools reveal another chapter. When archaeologists sift through layers of ancient caves, they sometimes find fragments of bone shaped into awls. needles, and points. Unlike stone, bone is softer, easier to sharpen into fine tips. These tools, worn smooth by repeated use, provide evidence that early humans worked hides with growing precision. They are among the clearest traces of clothing in deep prehistory. And all is simple, a slender piece of bone, ground to a sharp point. In skilled hands, it pierces hide without tearing it. Holes made this way can be threaded with sinew, plant fiber, or strips of hide itself. With this technique, garments could be tied more securely, fitted more closely, and layered more effectively. The presence of awls, some dating back more than 60,000 years in Africa, suggests that sewing, or at least piercing and fastening, was already practiced long before tailored clothing appears in Eurasia. At Sibudu Cave in South Africa, archaeologists discovered bone points with polish consistent with piercing soft material. Microscopic analysis showed wear patterns too smooth for wood or stone. Experiments confirmed that similar polish emerges when bone tools are used to work hides. These traces, though tiny, reveal the scale of human effort. Someone, thousands of generations ago, sat by a fire pressing bone against skin, punching holes again and again, teaching their hands how to shape coverings for the body. Needles appear later, but their arrival is a milestone. In Denisova Cave in Siberia, a carefully crafted needle more than 50,000 years old was found, complete with an eye for thread. It is the oldest known example of its kind, whether made by Denisovans or modern humans. Its existence shows that the knowledge of piercing hides had advanced to stitching. With thread drawn through an eye, skins could be joined edge to edge, creating garments that hugged the body rather than hung loosely. In colder climates, this innovation meant survival. One lesser-known discovery comes from Tafaralt Cave in Morocco. There, bone tools dating to about 90,000 years ago show polish suggesting hide working. Alongside them were beads of shell, drilled and strung. The combination hints at a cultural shift. Hides were not only processed for warmth, but may also have been decorated, adorned with beads and colors. If so, the roots of symbolic clothing extend deeper than once believed, blending utility with meaning. Mystery persists about how widely such tools were used. Bone is fragile, and many have been lost to time. Some regions preserve them better than others. Did every community create awls and needles, or only a few? Were they invented once and spread, or discovered independently in different places? The archaeological record offers no firm answer. Yet the scattered finds from Africa to Eurasia suggest that hide working with bone tools was not an isolated innovation. It was a shared response to climate and necessity. On a planetary scale, the significance is clear. As the Ice Age deepened, survival in colder zones required more than draped skins. Clothing had to be fitted, layered, and secured. Loose hides flapped in the wind, caught on branches, and left gaps for cold to enter. Pierced and stitched garments closed those gaps. They allowed hunters to travel longer in open plains, mothers to carry infants against the chest, and groups to push further into frost-rimmed valleys. The ability to pierce and sew extended human reach into environments no bare skin could endure. The scale of difference can be imagined in temperature. A person wrapped loosely in hides may survive a mild chill, but in freezing winds the gaps let in cold quickly. A stitched garment, layered closely, can preserve warmth for hours. The margin between these states is the margin between life and death. Across generations, bone awls and needles gave humans that margin. Archaeologists often find these tools in caves rich with other signs of life: hearths, beads, ochre, and stone blades. The presence of multiple technologies together suggests integration. Fire softened sinew, turning it into thread. Scrapers prepared hides, thinning them. Awls pierced the skins. Together, they formed a chain of craft. Clothing was no longer just draped protection, but engineered material, the result of combined tools and knowledge. Another subtle clue comes from microscopic fibers found in sediment. In some caves, plant fibers preserved by mineral crusts hint that thread was spun long before textiles. These fibers may have been used to bind or sew hides. If true, humans were already experimenting with materials beyond sinew. Such discoveries, though rare, expand the story of clothing beyond hides alone. They suggest a growing curiosity with fiber, one that would eventually lead to weaving and textiles. The planetary backdrop makes these developments even more striking. As glaciers advanced, humans began expanding beyond Africa into Eurasia. Crossing deserts, mountains, and river valleys, they encountered environments of intense cold. Without tailored garments, such journeys would have been impossible. Bone tools, though small and fragile, are thus silent witnesses to migrations that shaped our species. Each awl or needle is a fragment of humanity spread across the globe. The mystery deepens with Neanderthals. Evidence suggests they too worked hides, as scraper tools found at their sites show wear consistent with skin preparation. But few bone needles are associated with them. Did they sew, or rely mainly on draped skins? Some scholars argue that Neanderthals mastered hide working, but not sewing, which may have limited their ability to survive in extreme cold compared to modern humans. Others believe needles once existed, but have simply not survived. The debate continues, highlighting how much remains unknown. Still, the fragments we do have speak volumes. A slender needle from Siberia, a polished awl from South Africa, a worn bone point from Morocco, all tell of hands shaping clothing. They tell of nights spent pressing, piercing, and stitching. They tell of the quiet persistence of craft, repeated until skill became tradition. Without these tools, human expansion would have faltered. With them, the species stepped into climates and landscapes once closed. At night, by flickering fire, the scene repeats: a hide stretched on the ground, an awl in hand, a thread of sinew drawn through. The sound of piercing echoes softly, steady and patient. Each hole closes the gap against cold. Each stitch binds survival more tightly to the body. In these moments, the story of clothing becomes clear. It is not a single invention, but a sequence of acts shaped by necessity, preserved in tools of bone. Long before modern humans spread widely into Eurasia, Neanderthals had already adapted to the cold climates of Ice Age Europe. For hundreds of thousands of years, they lived in forests, valleys, and steppes that felt the full weight of glacial winds. To survive there without coverings would have been impossible. Their bones tell us they were robust, stocky, and built to conserve heat. Yet even strong bodies needed protection. Archaeological traces suggest Neanderthals, too, worked hides, preparing skins as coverings against the cold. Stone tools from Neanderthal sites show heavy use wear associated with hide scraping. The characteristic Mousterian scrapers found across Europe and the Near East are often polished and dulled in ways that match experimental hide working. When researchers replicate Neanderthal techniques using fresh animal skins, the same patterns appear along tool edges. This indicates that Neanderthals repeatedly scraped hides, cleaning and softening them for use. Even if no garments survive, the tools whisper of a craft practiced again and again. In some caves, bones of large animals such as bison, reindeer, and horse reveal cut marks along lines where skins would have been removed. These marks differ from those of butchery for meat. They align with flaying, an effort to peel skins away in large sheets. Such evidence strengthens the case that hides were not discarded but preserved. A reindeer hide, for example, offers thick insulation against cold, while horse hide resists tearing. For Neanderthals, who relied heavily on hunting, these resources were abundant and valuable. One lesser-known discovery comes from a site in southwestern France, where residues of birch tar were found on stone tools. Birch tar is one of the earliest known adhesives used to haft stone points onto wooden handles, but tar also has preservative qualities. Some scholars suggest that tar may have been applied to hides, strengthening seams or sealing fibers against moisture. Though the evidence is limited, it raises intriguing possibilities. Neanderthals may have experimented with materials beyond stone and bone in their hide work. The great mystery is whether Neanderthals ever sewed fitted garments. Few bone needles have been found at their sites, in contrast to those linked with modern humans and Denisovans. Some researchers argue that Neanderthals relied mainly on draped skins, tied or fastened with simple thongs, without the close stitching that creates snug garments. If true, this difference may have mattered deeply. Loose wraps are effective in moderate cold, but less efficient in harsh winds. Fitted clothing, sewn tight, retains heat far better. The absence of needles may therefore mark a technological limit. Yet caution is needed, bone decays quickly, and many sites may have lost fragile tools long ago. It is possible that Neanderthals did so, but their needles have not survived. Other indirect signs suggest they knew more than we think. All like tools appear at some sites, and wear on them hints at piercing soft material. If they used these for hides, then sewing in some form cannot be ruled out. The debate remains open, shaped by the silence of what time has erased. At a planetary scale, the question has great weight. As glaciers advanced, Eurasia grew harsher, winters lengthened, winds intensified, and snow covered wide plains. To survive here required clothing beyond simple wraps. Modern humans arriving later carried bone needles and stitched garments, enabling them to expand into Arctic zones. If Neanderthals lacked this technology, their range may have been restricted. They survived cold for millennia, but when climates grew most extreme, their methods may have left them vulnerable compared to Homo sapiens. The scale of their resilience should not be underestimated. For hundreds of thousands of years, Neanderthals thrived in Europe's cold. They hunted reindeer and mammoth, lit fires in caves, and endured winters with skill. They clearly had strategies for warmth, whether through fireside shelters, furs draped across bodies, or layered hides. Some researchers point to their body proportions, shorter limbs, wider chests, as natural adaptations to conserve heat. These physical traits, combined with cultural practices, kept them alive through many glacial cycles. One lesser-known clue comes from microscopic analysis of stone scrapers at the site of Abri-Peyroni in France. Their tiny residues of animal skin proteins were detected adhering to tool edges. This chemical evidence directly confirms that hides were worked on those stones. It is a rare glimpse of organic traces that survived beyond expectation. Such finds confirm what wear patterns suggested. Neanderthals engaged deeply in hide processing. Mystery also surrounds symbolic use. Some Neanderthal sites preserve eagle talons with cut marks, suggesting they were strung as ornaments. Red ochre residues have been found on stone tools and bones. Could hides, too, have been decorated? Perhaps some were stained with ochre, or adorned with beads of shell or bone. If so, Neanderthal clothing may not only have been functional, but also symbolic, carrying meaning of identity or status. The evidence is sparse, but it leaves open the possibility that symbolism extended to garments. Planetary forces again set the context. As Earth orbited through its cycles, climates shifted dramatically. Neanderthals lived through both warmer interglacials and bitter glacials. Their clothing practices had to flex with these changes. In warmer periods, light hides may have sufficed, while in cold phases, thicker layers were needed. This adaptability underscores their resilience.
Even if they lacked tailored sewing, their hide work allowed them to persist in climates that no bare human could endure.
The comparison with modern humans deepens the story. Genetic studies show interbreeding between Neanderthals and Homo sapiens, meaning encounters took place across Eurasia. Did knowledge of hide preparation pass between them? Did Neanderthals adopt sewing methods from humans, or humans learn hide-working techniques from Neanderthals? The archaeological record offers no certainty, but the overlap suggests cultural exchange was possible. Such interactions may have blended traditions, shaping the evolution of clothing itself.
At night, in a Neanderthal cave, the scene may have resembled that of modern humans. Fire glowed against stone walls. Skins hung above smoke to dry. Families huddled beneath furs, their breath visible in cold air. Tools lay scattered, edges dulled by scraping. The difference between species may not have been visible in that moment. Both sought warmth, both prepared hides, both relied on the remains of animals to survive the Ice Age winds.
The legacy of Neanderthal clothing practices remains partly hidden, but their traces endure. Scrapers dulled by hide, bones cut for flaying, residues preserved by chance, all testify to a people who shaped skins into coverings. Whether they sewed fitted garments or not, they demonstrate that the need for clothing is ancient, shared across branches of the human family. In their resilience and craft, Neanderthals stand as proof that clothing is not the invention of one group alone, but a shared heritage of humanity's struggle against the cold. Clothing begins as protection. At first, it is nothing more than animal skin wrapped around shoulders to guard against cold winds. But over time, humans learn that garments can carry meaning beyond survival. Skins become more than warmth, they become symbols. In beads strung on leather thongs, in pigments rubbed into hides, in the choice of which animal's skin to wear, clothing slowly begins to speak. The archaeological record offers glimpses of this shift. At sites in Africa dated to over 75,000 years ago, perforated shells appear. Strung together, they would have formed necklaces, bracelets, or sewn decorations. At Blombos Cave in South Africa, ochre pieces were found with engraved patterns, deliberate lines that suggest symbolic thought. Nearby, tools for scraping hides were also uncovered. The association hints that skins may have been stained with ochre or decorated with beads. Garments were no longer only shields against climate, but also carriers of identity. The choice of hide itself may have held meaning. A reindeer skin is thick and warm. suitable for freezing plains. A leopard skin, though less practical, is striking. To drape such a pelt across shoulders might have signaled courage, skill, or status. Hunters who brought down rare animals may have worn their skins as markers of achievement. Though the evidence is fragmentary, the logic of symbolism is universal. Humans see meaning in the natural world and carry it into their tools, art, and clothing. One lesser-known detail comes from sites in Morocco where beads made from marine shells were found over 100 kilometers from the sea. Carried inland, strung together, they suggest trade or movement across large distances. Such beads may have been sewn onto hides, creating decorated garments that told stories of connection. To wear shells far from the coast was to show participation in networks larger than one's immediate group. Clothing thus became a surface for displaying social bonds. Mystery surrounds how widespread symbolic clothing was. Did every group decorate hides, or only some? Was it limited to ceremonial use, or did it blend into daily life? The absence of preserved garments leaves these questions open. Archaeologists rely on beads, pigments, and indirect associations to imagine the possibilities. The evidence suggests that symbolism in dress was not rare, but we cannot know its full extent. What is certain is that humans had begun to think of clothing as more than function. At a planetary scale, this development resonates deeply. As climates grew harsher during glacial periods, clothing became essential everywhere. Yet once survival was secured, humans turned to expression. Across continents, people looked to the sky, the earth, and the animals around them, weaving meaning into their garments. The earth's vast cycles of cold and warmth framed human lives, but within that frame, symbolic creativity flourished. Clothing was no longer just adaptation to planetary forces, it was also reflection of cultural imagination. Symbolic dress may also have helped bind communities together. To wear similar patterns of beads or pigments was to declare belonging. In small groups scattered across wide landscapes, visible markers of identity mattered. They strengthened trust, reinforced alliances, and perhaps deterred outsiders. Even the simplest decoration could serve as a shared language. Clothing thus functioned as both technology and communication, expanding the role of garments in human society. Another subtle clue lies in the discovery of red ochre stains on burial remains. Some early burials, such as those at Kafsa Cave in Israel, include bones dusted with ochre. Though direct evidence of clothing is absent, it is possible that ochre-covered hides were placed with the dead. If so, clothing carried meaning not only in life but also in death, bridging the living and the spiritual. This suggests that garments had begun to inhabit the symbolic world as much as the physical. The scale of decoration varied. A single bead sewn onto a hide may have carried meaning as personal as any elaborate garment. Over generations, the practice expanded. By the time humans reached Ice Age Europe, elaborate beadwork and pendants adorned garments, transforming them into mobile canvases of art. The seeds of this tradition lie deep in earlier periods, when the first shells were pierced, the first hides stained with pigment, the first decision made to wear more than plain skin. Mystery also touches Neanderthals in this regard. Some of their sites preserve eagle talons with cut mark, possibly used as ornaments. Red ochre residues also appear in their layers. Did Neanderthals decorate their hides? If so, symbolic dress was not unique to modern humans. The distinction between species becomes blurred, with both finding meaning in clothing. Yet again, the evidence is too fragmentary to be certain. The debate continues, reminding us of the silence of deep time. Planetary changes underscore the importance of symbolic dress. As ice advanced and deserts spread, groups were forced into refuges clustering near rivers, lakes, and coasts. In such times, identity and cohesion were crucial. Garments that displayed belonging or status may have been vital to maintaining unity. The earth pressed harshly upon human life, but in response, humans created symbols that bound them together. Clothing was one of the visible threads of this resilience. One lesser-known example comes from Sungheir in Russia, a site dated to about 30,000 years ago. Burials there contain garments once covered with thousands of beads, sewn in patterns across the body. Though far younger than the earliest clothing, these finds reveal the depth symbolic dress could achieve. They suggest that roots of such practices reached far back. The beads of Blombos and Tafaralt were the first steps towards such elaborate expression. At night, by the fire, the scene may have been both practical and symbolic. A hide stretched for softening might also be stained with pigment. A parent might sew a bead onto a child's garment, passing down both warmth and identity. The garment became memory as well as protection. Each stitch or smear of color connected individuals to their group, to their ancestors, and to their world. On the planetary scale, symbolic clothing also reflects humanity's widening vision. By wearing shells from distant seas or ochre from distant quarries, people carried pieces of the wider earth on their bodies. They turned clothing into maps of connection, reminders that survival depended not only on local resources but also on networks stretching across landscapes. The earth, vast and shifting, became part of human identity through the garments they wore. In the end, the rise of symbolic dress marks a turning point. Clothing is no longer silent. It speaks of belonging, of memory, of imagination. It carries stories, whispers of belief, hints of pride. Though survival remains its first purpose, expression becomes inseparable from function. From this point forward, every garment holds dual meaning. It shields the body, and it declares identity. Step by step, groups of early humans began to push beyond the African homelands where their species first evolved. The roots were long, stretching through valleys, across deserts, and into highlands, over tens of thousands of years. Some of these journeys carried them into Eurasia, where climates grew far harsher. Here the air was colder, winters lasted longer, and ice sheets crept south across the continents. The decision to move northward demanded more than courage. It demanded new ways of surviving environments the human body was never naturally suited to endure. Clothing became one of the key answers. In Africa, hides had already been used for warmth, ground cover, and wraps. But once humans entered colder latitudes, those basic methods had to be expanded. Loose skins were no longer enough. Wind cut through gaps, snow-soaked hides, and freezing air seeped into every opening. Garments needed to be layered, tied tightly, and sometimes sewn into closer fits. Archaeological sites in Europe and Western Asia reflect this pressure. Awls and scrapers multiplied. Sewing needles appear, hinting at stitched hides designed to cling to the body. The tools testify to a shift. Clothing had become as necessary as fire. The animals of the northern lands offered resources for this new craft. Reindeer hides were abundant, thick yet pliable, well suited to garments. Mammoth hides were immense, useful for both shelters and heavy coverings. Bison and horse skins added variety. while smaller furs like hare or fox provided soft inner layers. Hunters returning from the cold plains brought back not only food, but also the raw materials of survival. In camps and caves, hides were scraped, smoked, and stitched into layered clothing. The work was constant, for garments wore out quickly in harsh climates, requiring new skins each season. One lesser-known clue comes from the site of Kostenki in Russia, where figurines carved from ivory show etched patterns along their bodies. Some researchers believe these lines may represent clothing, perhaps stitched garments or decorated furs. Though interpretation is debated, the figurines hint that people in colder regions imagine themselves clothed, perhaps even marking symbolic designs onto their representations. If true, it is a rare glimpse of how clothing was integrated into both daily life and cultural expression. The mystery is how early these adaptations emerged. Did the very first groups leaving Africa already possess the skills for layered clothing, or did they develop them only after encountering cold? Some argue that hide-working traditions were carried outward from Africa, refined along the way. Others suggest that necessity forced innovation in new lands, leading to rapid advances in garment making. The truth may be a blend of both: basic skills formed in Africa, expanded through experience in Eurasia's winters. At the planetary scale, these movements were immense. As ice sheets expanded, climates across Eurasia oscillated between cold and colder still. Open steppe tundra landscapes dominated, stretching for thousands of kilometers. Trees were sparse, shelter limited, and fuel often scarce. To travel and survive in these settings required more than simple wraps. Humans had to master layered clothing, garments that trapped warm air close to the skin, insulated with furs, and shielded with heavier hides outside. Clothing became an ecosystem carried on the body, a microclimate that turned freezing plains into survivable terrain. The difference in endurance was dramatic. A person wearing multiple layers of hide could travel for hours in sub-zero temperatures. Without such garments, frostbite and exhaustion would come swiftly. Archaeologists studying faunal remains in northern sites often note the abundance of reindeer bones, suggesting heavy reliance on this species. Reindeer provided meat, fat, antler for tools, and skins for clothing. Modern experiments show that reindeer fur, with its hollow hairs, is exceptionally insulating. To wear such a skin was to carry warmth designed by evolution itself. Humans learned to borrow it, shaping hides into coats, boots, and hoods. Another subtle clue lies in the discovery of beads and ornaments sewn into Ice Age clothing. At sites like Songhir, thousands of beads were found arranged in patterns that match garment outlines. These burials, though younger than the first migrations, confirm that by the time humans had fully settled Eurasia, clothing was layered, stitched, and decorated. The roots of that tradition lie earlier, in the first movements into cold lands, when survival drove experimentation with sewing and layering. Mystery remains around Neanderthals in this context. As Section 9 noted, their hide working is well attested, but evidence for sewing is scarce. Did they rely mainly on draped skins, while Homo sapiens developed tailored garments? If so, this difference may have shaped resilience in the cold. Modern humans, found with stitched clothing, could expand into Arctic-like environments, while Neanderthals may have been confined to regions where winters, though severe, were survivable with looser wraps. This contrast highlights how clothing technology may have influenced the broader patterns of human expansion and survival. Planetary cycles continued to test these adaptations. As glacial and interglacial periods alternated, Climates shifted quickly by geological standards. One millennium might bring slightly warmer forests. The next might plunge into steppes swept by blizzards. Humans who moved into these lands had to remain flexible. Clothing provided that flexibility. A garment could be layered in winter and shed in warmer seasons. Furs could be added or removed. Hides tied or loosened. This adaptability mirrored the adaptability of human movement itself, responding to Earth's rhythms with cultural solutions. The scale of migration is striking. From the Levant into Central Asia is a journey of thousands of kilometers. From there to Siberia, still further. Each step required adjustment to new animals, new climates, new challenges. Yet with clothing made from hides, groups could persist. Fires warmed their camps. But garments carried warmth with them into the open. Clothing thus enabled expansion into regions that once seemed beyond reach, extending the human footprint across nearly every environment on Earth. At night, in a frozen valley, the scene is vivid. A fire crackles, its smoke curling into still air. Around it, figures sit wrapped in reindeer skins, hoods pulled low. Boots made from hide shield their feet from snow. Children sleep, swaddled in furs, close to their parents. Tools lie nearby, scrapers dulled by hours of work. Bone awls sharp from recent carving. Each object speaks of effort invested in survival. The garments they wear are not luxuries but are lifelines, crafted through patience, skill, and necessity. In these colder lands, clothing is more than technology, it is transformation. It turns fragile bodies into beings capable of enduring frost and snow. It allows humans to walk across tundra where wolves howl and winds cut sharp. It extends the reach of migration, enabling settlements in caves, shelters, and open plains far from the warmth of Africa. Layer by layer, hide by hide, humanity reshapes itself to match the planet's extremes. Thus the movement into colder lands marks not only a geographical journey but also a technological one. With each step northward, clothing grows more complex. From simple wraps, it becomes layered garments. From loose hides, it becomes stitched and fitted forms. From survival, it becomes identity. The Ice Age may have chilled the earth, but in response, humans carried warmth with them, woven from the bodies of the animals they hunted and shaped into garments of endurance. The history of clothing is hard to see. Unlike stone blades or bones, hides and fibers vanish quickly. They rot in soil, dissolve in damp caves, and leave behind little more than faint traces. For archaeologists, this creates a silence. The very materials that once touched the human body, that wrapped it in warmth and protection, are almost always absent. What we know of early garments comes not from the skins themselves, but from the tools that shaped them, the residues they left, and the indirect signs of their use. This absence is one of prehistory's enduring mysteries. Stone tools speak loudly where skins are mute, scrapers dulled by hide work, awls polished by piercing, and needles shaped with care all testify to garments that no longer exist. But these are shadows of the whole. The actual hides, the cords of sinew, the woven fibers that may have been tied or stitched, all have been erased by time. Even when fragments do survive, they are fragile, pressed into mineral crusts or preserved in frozen ground. They remind us how much has been lost. One lesser-known example comes from a site in the Czech Republic, where a piece of twisted fiber was preserved in clay deposits more than 25,000 years old. It is one of the earliest direct signs of cordage. Such fibers may have been used as thread for sewing hides or for tying garments. Yet finds like this are extraordinarily rare. For every fibre preserved, countless others have vanished. The absence of material evidence does not mean absence of clothing, only that nature hides it from view. The mystery deepens with ochre. Across Africa and Eurasia, ochre appears in caves as lumps, powders, and ground fragments. It stains bones, beads, and tools. Some scholars argue that ochre was rubbed onto hides, both as decoration and as preservative. If true, then clothing carried colour, pattern, and symbolism long before textiles existed. But again, the hides themselves are gone, leaving only ochre residues to suggest what once was. Were garments bright red, stained with iron oxide? Did certain groups favour certain colours? We may never know. At a planetary scale, the silence is striking. Earth has preserved glaciers, deserts, and fossils across millions of years, yet the daily garments of our ancestors remain invisible. The absence reminds us of the fragility of organic life. The very materials most central to survival, skins, fibres, and threads, vanish, leaving only hints. This loss shapes how we reconstruct human history. We see stone clearly, but the softer world of skin, plant, and fibre remains hidden. Archaeologists rely on indirect methods to fill these gaps. Microscopic analysis of stone tools reveals patterns of wear-matching hide processing. Chemical tests sometimes detect residues of collagen or fat. Soil layers hold impressions of fibres or hides pressed into the earth. Parasites, too, provide clues. As noted earlier, clothing-specific lice diverged from head lice over 170,000 years ago. Their presence suggests regular body coverings, even though no garments survive. In this way, the tiniest organisms tell stories the hides themselves cannot. The absence of preserved materials also sparks debate. Some scholars argue that humans may have adopted clothing earlier than current evidence suggests, perhaps even before leaving Africa. Others are more cautious, pointing out that without direct finds, but we cannot be certain. The silence of organic remains allows multiple interpretations. Each new discovery, a needle, a fibre, a residue, reshapes the timeline, sometimes pushing it deeper, sometimes narrowing it. The story of clothing is one of evidence gained and evidence lost. One subtle but telling clue comes from permafrost. In Siberia and Alaska, frozen burials from much later times have preserved garments made of fur and hide. Though not from the earliest periods, they reveal techniques that may have ancient roots: layered furs, stitched seams, decorated edges. These finds show what is possible when conditions favor preservation. They serve as analogues for the garments that once existed in deep prehistory, even though those early examples are gone. The comparison helps archaeologists imagine what may have been worn tens of thousands of years earlier. The mystery of lost materials also raises questions about innovation. Did humans experiment with plant fibers long before weaving is visible in the record? Were early hides combined with grasses or bark for added strength? Some impressions in fired clay from Central Europe suggest that woven mats or baskets existed more than 20,000 years ago. If such weaving was possible, perhaps fibers were also used in clothing. Yet without direct remains, the answers remain elusive. The silence leaves room for cautious speculation, but demands restraint. On a planetary level, this silence has consequences for how we understand human migration. The expansion into colder regions depended on clothing, yet the garments themselves are missing. We reconstruct their presence from tools and genetics, but the details, the shapes, the colors, the stitching are hidden. This gap reminds us that much of human adaptation occurred in materials too fragile to survive geological time. Our history is not only in stone and bone, but also in the vanishing world of hide and fibre. Still, the indirect evidence forms a consistent pattern. Wherever humans lived in cold climates, tools for hide-working are found. Wherever beads and ochre appear, decoration is implied. Wherever lice genes are studied, clothing is confirmed. Together, these fragments weave a story it's incomplete but persuasive. Clothing was part of human life long before the evidence we can see. The mystery lies not in whether it existed, but in what forms it took and how widely it was used. At night, this absence is almost visible. Picture a cave where families gather by fire. Skins hang above smoke. Beads glint in flickering light, and pigments stain hands. Yet in the soil layers that remain, only ash, beads, and stones endure. The hides themselves dissolve. What was once central to survival leaves no mark but faint impressions and residues. To reconstruct this world is to imagine a round absence, filling silence with inference. This fragility is part of the human story. Our ancestors lived in a world where much of their craft was temporary, renewable, and organic. The garments they wore were born of life and returned to the earth quickly. The tools that shaped them, made of stone and bone, endured. The imbalance skews our vision of the past. We see hard materials clearly, but the softer, more intimate world of clothing is hidden. Yet in that hidden world lay much of what made migration possible, what made survival in cold lands achievable, and what gave rise to expression through dress. Thus, the mystery of lost materials remains one of prehistory's most profound silences. It reminds us that much of what humans created was fleeting, erased by time. Yet through traces, tools, residues, parasites, we glimpse the presence of garments long vanished. The silence is not empty but filled with echoes, pointing to a world where clothing was already shaping human destiny. The earliest garments were loose hides, draped or tied across the body. They served their purpose but left gaps against the wind. Over time, humans discovered that piercing skins with awls and threading them with sinew allowed edges to be joined. From this moment, sewing began. With every pierced hole and every drawn thread, clothing became more than shelter. It became shaped, fitted, and expressive. Stitching brought identity into dress, allowing people not only to survive, but also to present themselves to others. Bone needles mark this turning point. In Siberia's Denisova cave, a needle over 50,000 years old has been found, complete with an eye drilled carefully for thread. In other Eurasian sites, awls and needles appear regularly by 40,000 years ago. Their wear patterns confirm repeated use on soft materials. These tools allowed hides to be stitched edge to edge, creating coats, leggings, and boots. Such garments clung closer to the body, trapping heat far more efficiently than draped skins. In cold climates, this difference meant survival. But it also meant choice. Once garments were stitched, their shapes could vary, reflecting the preferences and traditions of each group. Stitching also permitted layering. Inner furs could be sewn into undergarments, outer hides into cloaks or coats. Boots stitched from reindeer hide could be lined with softer hair or fox fur. Hoods could be added, sleeves fitted, seams reinforced. With each new form, clothing became not just a response to weather, but an extension of creativity. Groups could experiment with design, developing distinct traditions of dress.
Over generations, these traditions became markers of identity, visible in every garment.
One lesser-known detail comes from burials at Sungheir in Russia, dating to about 30,000 years ago. The skeletons were found covered with thousands of ivory beads arranged in patterns that matched the outlines of stitched garments. Each bead had been sewn individually, suggesting countless hours of labor. The garments themselves decayed, but the beads remain, frozen in position. They reveal coats, leggings, and head coverings, decorated in ways that spoke of status, community, or memory. The stitching was not only functional, it was artistic. The mystery lies in how early symbolic stitching emerged. Did decoration accompany the very first sewn garments, or did it develop later, once survival was secure? Evidence is scarce. Some argue that beads and ochre were already sewn onto hides in Africa before humans left the continent, pointing to early symbolic dress. Others believe that true decoration appears only later in Eurasia. The truth may never be known, hidden by the loss of organic materials. Yet the pattern is clear. Once stitching allowed fitted garments, expression followed quickly. Clothing became both shield and symbol. At a planetary scale, this innovation transformed human reach. Sewn garments extended survival into the coldest regions of Ice Age Eurasia. With stitched coats and boots, groups could endure Arctic winters, hunt across frozen plains, and settle in caves where snow drifted at the entrance. The planet's glacial rhythms, which once constrained human movement, now pressed people outward. Clothing stitched with sinew became a passport into climates the body alone could never withstand. The scale of endurance can be measured in journeys. To cross the steppe from Central Asia into Siberia required weeks of travel in sub-zero temperatures. Without stitched garments, such a migration would have been impossible. With them, humans expanded across continents, reaching the edge of Beringia and eventually moving into the Americas. In this way, stitching was not only a craft, but also a force of migration, shaping the map of human settlement across the world. Another subtle clue lies in the choice of materials. Sinew, dried and softened, provided strong thread. Plant fibers, twisted into cords, may also have been used. In some cases, leather thongs stitched garments together. Each material had strengths and weaknesses, and people learned to choose according to need. A seam stitched with sinew held firmly, while one tied with leather could be loosened and adjusted. Knowledge of materials deepened with each generation, weaving practical science into daily life. The act of sewing also changed social life. Stitching garments took time, often many hours for a single piece. Around the fire, people sewed together, teaching children, sharing stories, and passing on patterns. Clothing became a collective labor, its designs reflecting the community as much as the individual. To wear a garment was to wear the work of many hands. In this way, stitching stitched people together, binding identity across generations. One lesser-known piece of evidence comes from microscopic residues on bone needles. Traces of plant fiber have been detected, suggesting that thread was not limited to sinew alone. These faint fibers may represent some of the earliest experiments with spinning. If so, then stitching also planted the seed for textiles. a tradition that would flourish thousands of years later. Even in prehistory, the path toward weaving was already being laid through the simple act of sewing skins. Mystery persists around Neanderthals. As discussed earlier, their sites show abundant hide processing, but little evidence for sewing. If they did not stitch garments, their clothing may have remained loose, leaving them at disadvantage in colder climates. Homo sapiens, with fitted clothing, may have been able to expand into harsher zones, gaining advantage in endurance. Whether true or not, this difference highlights the role stitching played in shaping survival. Planetary changes continued to test human resilience. As glaciers advanced and retreated, environments shifted rapidly. Groups adapted by altering their garments, heavier coats in glacial phases, lighter wraps in interglacials. Stitching allowed this flexibility. Seams could be adjusted, garments modified, layers added or removed. Clothing became a dynamic tool, responding to the planet's rhythms with human ingenuity. At night, the transformation is visible in the firelight. A parent threads sinew through a needle, pulling it carefully through hide. The garment takes shape slowly, edge meeting edge, seam closing gap. Children watch, learning the motions. The fire crackles, smoke curls upward, and outside the cave, frost lies across the land. When the garment is finished, it will not only warm the body but also carry the marks of the maker's hand. It will declare identity as surely as it provides protection. In this way, stitching reshaped the human relationship with clothing. No longer merely draped coverings, garments became tailored, layered, decorated, and symbolic. They marked belonging, signaled status, and expressed creativity. They allowed humans to move further, endure longer, and imagine themselves differently. The needle, small and simple, was a tool of profound transformation. With every stitch, humanity shaped both survival and self. When people first draped hides across their shoulders, the act was simple. A piece of animal skin became a shield against wind and cold. But as centuries turned to millennia, that simple shield grew into something more. Clothing was no longer only material. It became technology, an invention that altered human possibilities as surely as stone blades or fire. Every stitch, every seam, every layer was part of a growing toolkit that extended the human body into environments once impossible to endure. Technology is often imagined as stone, metal, or machine. Yet clothing fits the same definition, a deliberate human creation that solves problems and reshapes survival. A stitched coat is a barrier against freezing air. A fur-lined boot is protection against frostbitten ground. A hood, stitched from reindeer hide, shields the face from snow. These garments are not accidents. They are crafted responses to need, refined by trial and error, passed across generations, and stored in collective memory. Clothing is technology carried on the body. Archaeological traces confirm this transformation. Needles appear in Siberia, bone awls in Africa, scrapers in Europe. Each tool points to garments that were engineered, not just draped. Sewn seams trap warm air. Layered hides insulate by design. Beads stitched into patterns hint at planning beyond function. By the time humans reached Ice Age Eurasia, their clothing was already complex technology, adapted, varied, and specialized. One lesser-known clue comes from microscopic analysis of wear on bone needles. Some show polish that suggests not just hide stitching but repeated contact with fine thread. This implies garments more sophisticated than crude wraps. To pull thread thousands of times through small holes requires patience and planning. These traces, though invisible to the eye, reveal how intensely clothing had become part of technological life. Mystery remains around how early clothing achieved this level of refinement. Was there a single moment when garments became fully engineered, or did it unfold gradually, with small steps, an extra seam here, a new fastening there, over countless generations? The record is silent. We see only fragments of tools and beads. Yet the silence itself points to an important truth. Innovation in clothing was not sudden, but steady, woven into the slow rhythm of human adaptation. At the planetary scale, this transformation had immense consequences. Earth, during the late Pleistocene, was unpredictable. Glaciers advanced and retreated, deserts expanded and shrank, monsoons shifted, rivers dried, and coastlines stretched far out as seas fell. Clothing gave humans resilience in the face of these global forces. A portable technology, it moved with the body. Unlike shelters, clothing required no fixed location. Unlike fire, it did not fade with fuel. It traveled across valleys, mountains, and tundra, carrying warmth into every new environment. This portability expanded the human range. But without clothing, migration into northern Eurasia, Siberia, or eventually the Americas would have been impossible. Bare skin, even near fires, could not endure such cold. With clothing, humans carried their own shelters, stepping into climates that no primate had ever occupied. Clothing was thus a gateway technology, opening continents, shaping routes, and determining where humanity could spread. The scale of this expansion can be seen in distances. From Africa to Siberia is more than 8,000 kilometers across deserts, mountains, and frozen steppes. Each step along this journey demanded clothing suited to new conditions. Garments had to adapt to snow, to dust, to wind, to rain. The fact that humans succeeded in this migration is itself proof that clothing had become reliable technology. Without it, the journey would have ended far earlier. Another subtle clue comes from burials in Ice Age Europe. At Sungir, as noted earlier, garments were covered with thousands of beads sewn in elaborate patterns. These were not mere adornments. To sew thousands of beads required careful design, planning, and hours of labor. Such garments were technologies of identity as much as warmth. They reveal that by this stage, clothing had become multi-layered, a system of insulation, a canvas of symbolism, and a product of engineering. Mystery also surrounds the role of gender and division of labor in clothing technology. Who scraped hides? Who sewed? Who decorated? Ethnographic parallels suggest that such tasks may have been shared, with some specialization. But direct evidence is lacking. What is certain is that sewing garments was labor-intensive, requiring skill and memory. The persistence of clothing across millennia shows that knowledge was reliably transmitted. Clothing as technology depended not only on tools, but also on teaching. Planetary forces again shaped its development. As ice sheets advanced, new animals entered the human toolkit: reindeer, muskox, mammoth. Each species offered hides with distinct properties, some softer, some thicker, some more resistant to water. Humans learned which to use for coats, which for boots, which for shelters. This ecological knowledge was part of the technology of clothing, as critical as the needle itself. To survive, people had to know not only how to sew, but also which animal offered the right skin for the right purpose. At night, in a snowbound valley, clothing technology showed its value most clearly. Fire flickered, but wind pressed into the cave. Children swaddled in stitched furs slept more deeply than those wrapped in loose skins. Hunters returned with garments still intact after days in the cold. Elders adjusted seams, repairing holes with sinew thread. Every stitch carried survival. Every seam closed the gap between fragile skin and hostile climate. Technology here was not abstract but immediate, woven directly into life. On the planetary scale, clothing also altered how humans related to the environment. By wearing hides, people blurred the line between themselves and the animals they hunted. They carried the warmth of reindeer, the toughness of bison, the endurance of mammoth. Clothing turned the body into a hybrid of human and animal, technology and biology. In this blending lay both survival and symbolism. It was technology that reshaped not only the environment, but also human identity. Thus, by the late stages of the Ice Age, clothing had become a fully developed technology. It was portable, adaptable, layered, and symbolic. It carried humans across continents, through glacial winters, into deserts, and eventually across oceans. It was one of the earliest and most transformative inventions, as vital as fire, as enduring as stone. In every seam and every wrap, it extended the reach of the species, allowing fragile bodies to thrive on a restless planet. From the moment a hunter first pulled a skin across weary shoulders, clothing has walked alongside humanity. At first it was nothing more than warmth borrowed from animals. Later, it became stitched, layered, and decorated. By the time humans spread into every corner of the earth, clothing was no longer simply protection. It had become identity, technology, and memory. The threads woven through prehistory point forward into all that would follow, shaping the future of culture as much as the survival of bodies. In Africa, hides were first scraped and smoked to last beyond days. In Eurasia, they were stitched into coats and boots to guard against Ice Age winds. Across deserts, they became shields against dust and sun. In each environment, clothing carried the body where bare skin could not go. With it, humans endured freezing plains, scaled high plateaus, and crossed windswept tundra. Without it, migration would have faltered, limited to climates close to warmth. Clothing turned landscapes once hostile into places that could be lived in, hunted in, and remembered. The archaeological record is clear in its silence and its hints. Skins themselves are gone, but tools remain. Scrapers dulled by hides, awls polished smooth, needles with drilled eyes all testify to garments now vanished. Beads and ochre suggest decoration. Parasites whisper of coverings worn every day. Burials hint at clothing laid carefully with the dead. Together, these fragments form a tapestry of absence and presence. Though the garments themselves have dissolved, their traces endure, pointing to a long tradition stretching deep into time. One lesser-known discovery comes from a site in Georgia, where flax fibers more than 30,000 years old were preserved in a cave's damp soil. Some were twisted, dyed, or cut, perhaps used as thread or cords. Though far younger than the first hides, they hint at a crucial transition from animal skins to plant fibers. Clothing, once bound to the hunt, began to open toward the cultivated and the woven. These fragile fibers foreshadow the textile traditions that would later flourish in every culture. Mystery remains about when humans first wore garments daily, not just in cold seasons. Was clothing already constant in Africa before migrations outward? Or did it become essential only under Ice Age skies? The absence of direct evidence leaves the answer uncertain. Some scholars argue that clothing-specific lice prove regular garments were worn by at least 170,000 years ago. Others caution that lice timelines are difficult to pin precisely. The debate continues, reminding us how much remains hidden in the silence of organic remains. At a planetary scale, clothing helped humans weave themselves into the rhythms of the Earth. Glaciers advanced, seas fell, deserts spread, and still people moved. With hides stitched and layered, they crossed Beringia into the Americas. With garments lined in fur, they endured Arctic nights lit only by auroras. With cloaks dyed with pigments, they created symbols of belonging across wide plains. Clothing was a portable response to planetary change, technology that moved as quickly as migration itself. The scale of its impact is immense. Fire could warm, but only in place. Tools could cut and hunt, but only with labor. Clothing, however, wrapped the body every moment, transforming fragility into endurance. A coat was a shelter worn on the back. A boot was the difference between crossing snow or falling to frost. A hood was a barrier against storms. In these forms, clothing was as vital as language or memory, carried in every step of human expansion. Another subtle clue lies in the earliest preserved garment, much later in time, but carrying echoes of older traditions. In the frozen graves of Siberia, fur coats, stitched boots, and decorated hats have survived for thousands of years. They reveal sophistication, layering, and artistry. Though these garments belong to a later age, their principles are ancient. The techniques they embody, scraping, stitching, decorating, were first forged tens of thousands of years earlier, when survival depended on hides prepared beside the fire. Mystery also surrounds the symbolic leap. When did clothing shift from necessity to statement? Was it when the first bead was sewn onto a hide, or when ochre stained a garment red? Was it when shells carried from distant coasts were displayed on cloaks, or when ivory beads traced elaborate patterns across coats of Ice Age burials? The line cannot be drawn clearly. Yet the pattern is visible. Once humans could shape garments securely, they began to shape them meaningfully. Clothing became language without words, marking who belonged, who led, who remembered. Planetary forces did not relent. The Ice Age waxed and waned, deserts pulsed in and out of greenness, and seas rose and fell. Through it all, clothing gave humans resilience. With garments, they crossed into colder, drier, and harsher lands. With garments, they preserved traditions of decoration and meaning. With garments, they prepared the way for the future. At night, the image endures. Fire glows in a cave mouth. Skins hang above smoke. Stitched garments dry in the heat. Children play with beads, threading them onto sinew. Elders adjust seams, teaching how to pierce hide without tearing. Outside, winds sweep across plains. But inside the cave, warmth endures. The garments are more than tools. They are heritage, carried on bodies, carried in memory. On a planetary scale, this heritage threads into everything that follows. From hides, humans learned to stitch. From stitching, they learned to weave. From weaving, they learned to dye, embroider, and design. The roots of all textiles, all fabrics, all fashion lie in those first scraped and smoked hides. Every garment today, whether simple wool or complex synthetic, carries echoes of that ancient moment when survival first wrapped itself in skins. Clothing as technology, identity, and symbol is one of humanity's oldest companions. It carried us into cold lands, across oceans, and into every environment on Earth. It taught us patience, craft, and imagination. It bound groups together, marked belonging, and opened futures. In every seam and thread lies the memory of adaptation. The story of clothing is the story of humanity itself. Fragile, inventive, enduring, and always moving forward. The story of clothing begins in silence. No skins remain from those earliest nights. No threads survive from the first seams. Yet, through stone tools, bone awls, and faint residues, we glimpse what once was. We see humans gathering by fire, scraping hides, rubbing them with fat, and hanging them in smoke. We see garments draped and tied, then pierced and stitched, slowly, step by step. Necessity became craft, and craft became tradition. Clothing was more than warmth. It was resilience carried on the body. It allowed humans to cross deserts where winds scoured skin, to climb plateaus where frost clung to grass, to step into valleys where snow fell endlessly. It was portable shelter, the quiet companion of every migration. With garments, fragile bodies endured planetary forces. With garments, humanity spread into every land. Yet clothing also became expression. Beads sewn into hides, ochre rubbed into skins, shells carried from distant coasts. These were not only practical, but symbolic. To wear them was to speak without words, to declare belonging, to remember ancestors, to mark the rhythm of life and death. Garments became identity as much as protection. What endures today is not the material, but the memory. The stitches of the past have dissolved, yet their influence remains. Every textile, every design, every fabric carries echoes of those first hides, scraped and softened beside fire. In every thread of modern clothing lives a shadow of ancient invention. The mystery remains: when exactly did it begin? We may never know, but what is certain is that clothing shaped humanity as deeply as language or fire. It turned survival into possibility, necessity into culture, and fragility into endurance. In this way, threads from the deep past continue to weave through our lives today.